He looked down at her, a nurse in scrubs, and sneered. "Why are you even talking to me?" He thought she was just another lowly hospital worker. But the moment he read her name tag, everything changed. His face went pale. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life twists.
The luxury wing of St. Margaret's Hospital gleamed with pristine white tiles, polished chrome rails, and soft classical music floating through the air. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive air fresheners, a scent that seemed designed to remind everyone entering here that this was wealth, comfort, and power. In room 512, seated in a hospital bed that looked more like a throne than anything else, lay Mr. Harrison Wellesley, a man in his late 60s, draped in silk robes, with an expression that screamed entitlement. He had spent decades surrounded by wealth, influence, and deference, and he expected the same everywhere he went, even here in a hospital. Into this world of polished perfection stepped Nurse Ayanna Langston. Her scrubs were simple, a soft blue, and she carried the calm confidence of someone who had seen too much to be easily shaken. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her movements efficient yet graceful. Her name tag read, Ayanna Langston, RN. From the moment she entered, Mr. Wellesley's gaze was like a physical force pushing her back. He didn't just glance at her, he scrutinized, judged, and found fault before she even spoke. "Are you here to clean my room, or what?" he spat, voice dripping with contempt. "I'm here to check your vitals and administer your medication, sir." "Medication?" He laughed, sharp, almost cruel. "Do you even know what you're doing? You're just a nurse. Just a nurse." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes didn't waver. She could have let the insult roll off her, but every word he spoke stung. Not because she doubted herself, but because he believed he had the right to belittle her. She started taking his blood pressure. The cuff hissed as it inflated, and Mr. Wellesley leaned back, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Make sure you don't mess this up," he said. "I have very little patience for mistakes." "Yes, sir," Ayanna replied, her voice calm and unwavering. Internally, she bristled. Every fiber of her being wanted to tell him off, to remind him that competence and compassion weren't measured by wealth. But she didn't. She worked better than anyone in this hospital, and she knew that showing restraint now would speak louder than any words. As she recorded his vitals, he kept up his onslaught. "Why do you even care about my health? Nurses like you just follow orders. You probably don't even understand what you're doing." Ayanna didn't flinch. She simply adjusted the IV drip, making sure everything was flowing correctly. "I'm here to make sure you recover safely, sir. That's my priority." "Priority?" He snapped, sitting upright suddenly. "Do you know who I am? I could have any doctor in the country here in my room within an hour. And you're just... He waved a dismissive hand at her. Ayanna's pulse quickened slightly, but her professional mask stayed in place. She had faced prejudice before. She had been underestimated countless times. This was not new. What was new was the sheer audacity of his arrogance, the way he believed his money made him better than her. A fellow nurse knocked lightly on the door and peered in. "Ayanna, do you need any help?" "No, thank you," she said firmly, although she didn't take her eyes off Mr. Wellesley. She wanted him to understand. Help wouldn't come from others. He would see her strength alone. By now, Mr. Wellesley was growing frustrated that she wasn't flinching under his barrage. He leaned back, his face contorting in irritation. "You're so bold! Do you even know your place?" Ayanna finally spoke, her voice soft but cutting. "Sir, my place is where I choose to be. Right now, that's caring for your health. I take pride in what I do, and I take pride in myself." The words hung in the air. For a moment, the only sound was the soft beep of the heart monitor. Mr. Wellesley blinked, as if he had never heard such defiance from someone he deemed beneath him. Then, casually, Ayanna moved to check his wristband, her hands steady. That's when he glanced down on her name tag. The letters Ayanna Langston were embossed clearly, and something in the name, something in the way it was pronounced on her badge, made him pause. For the first time, his smug, imperious demeanor faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. A flicker of recognition passed across his face, followed by a pale, stunned expression. Ayanna noticed nothing, her attention entirely on her patient's care. But inside, a quiet satisfaction bubbled. She knew that someday people like him would see her for who she truly was, and not a moment too soon either. Outside the room, the sun cast a golden glow through the hospital windows. The world beyond room 512 moved on, oblivious to the small yet powerful clash that had just taken place inside. A clash of wealth against dignity, arrogance against quiet strength, and prejudice against truth. And as Mr. Wellesley stared at her name tag, Ayanna continued her work, calm, composed, and unstoppable.
The tension in room 512 didn't ease after their first encounter. If anything, it thickened, clinging to the air like a stubborn fog. Mr. Harrison Wellesley reclined in his bed, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and a scowl permanently etched across his face. He watched every movement of Nurse Ayanna Langston as if she were under a microscope, and in his mind, she was failing the test. Ayanna, however, moved with quiet determination. Every time she entered the room, she carried not just her medical tools, but her dignity and resolve. She knew the hospital wing saw hundreds of patients, many of them spoiled, impatient, and entitled, but few were as blatantly disrespectful as Mr. Wellesley. And yet, she held herself steady. As she checked his vitals for the second time that morning, he let out an impatient sigh. "Must we go through this again? I don't have the whole day to waste with someone like you," he snapped. Ayanna met his gaze for a fleeting moment. "Sir, it's important we monitor your health carefully. That's how we prevent complications." "Complications," he scoffed. "Do you even know what that means, or are you just repeating phrases nurses learn in school?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she subtly adjusted his IV line, making sure the medication drip was perfect, and double-checked his chart. Every action she took was precise, calculated, and professional, and yet Mr. Wellesley's eyes missed none of it. Minutes ticked by, and he continued to belittle her. "I suppose you're going to fuss over me every hour, huh? Is that all your life amounts to, wasting it on people like me?" A flicker of irritation crossed her mind, but she pushed it down. Ayanna had learned long ago that anger could cloud judgment, and in a situation like this, competence and calmness were her greatest weapons. She simply replied, "My priority is your safety and recovery, sir." Despite his arrogance, cracks began to show. During one of her rounds, she noticed a subtle irregularity in his heartbeat, a small arrhythmia that could escalate if left untreated. Without hesitation, she alerted the attending physician and calmly explained the situation. The physician arrived within minutes, nodding at her observations. Mr. Wellesley, who had been about to wave her off, froze as the doctor acknowledged her recommendation. "You caught this early. Good work," the physician said, giving her a professional nod. Mr. Wellesley's face paled for a brief second. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Ayanna, however, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her smirk. She simply continued her work, her hands steady, her eyes calm. Later, when she returned with his lunch tray, he sneered again. "You're going to serve my food, too? I hope you don't spill it on me.
I wouldn't want to see you ruin something you can't fix." Ayana placed the tray carefully on the bedside table, maintaining perfect composure. "I'll make sure everything is in order, sir," she said politely, her voice unwavering. It was in moments like these that her colleagues watched quietly from the doorway, impressed and concerned. One junior nurse whispered to another, "How does she stay so calm? I'd have lost my temper hours ago." Ayana's calmness wasn't just a facade. It was strategy and self-respect intertwined. She understood that Mr. Wellesley's arrogance was his armor, and responding with aggression would only escalate the situation. Instead, she let her professionalism speak louder than words. Throughout the day, small victories accumulated. She noticed subtle medication errors in his chart, corrected minor issues in his IV, and anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. Each time, the arrogant patient found himself silently relying on her, though he wouldn't admit it. But the battle wasn't over. Mr. Wellesley's pride remained unbroken. "I don't know why you even bother," he muttered at one point. "You think your little efforts make a difference?" Ayana paused, looked him in the eye, and said softly, "Sometimes, sir, the smallest efforts make the biggest difference. That's what keeps people alive." He blinked at her, almost startled, as if those words carried weight beyond his understanding. For the first time, the dismissive mask on his face faltered, if only slightly. By the end of her shift, she had earned a grudging acknowledgement, though not verbally. Mr. Wellesley's scowl remained, but there was a flicker of unease, a crack in his armor of arrogance. And Ayana knew that eventually he would have to confront what he had underestimated all along: her intelligence, her skill, and her unwavering dignity. And deep down, she also knew the moment was approaching when her true identity, something more than a nurse, would finally make him pause. The third day of Ayana's shift began quietly, but there was something in the air, an uneasy stillness that crawled across the hospital corridors. When Ayana stepped into room 512, the familiar scent of disinfectant and expensive cologne greeted her, but something else caught her attention. Mr. Wellesley didn't look right. He was sitting upright, his posture rigid, one hand pressed against his chest, not dramatically, but subtly, like a man trying to hide discomfort. His face held a shade of irritation, but underneath it, a thin veil of unease. Ayana immediately noticed. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice warm but professional. "How are you feeling today?" He snapped back quickly. "Like I always feel. Fine. Just do your rounds." But the slight tremor in his fingers told another story. Ayana moved closer. "Are you experiencing any discomfort, tightness, shortness of breath?" His eyes darted away. "I said I'm fine. Stop asking unnecessary questions." But she didn't step back. Instead, she calmly placed the pulse oximeter on his finger. Within seconds, the reading flashed, lower than usual. Ayana's heart tightened. Without hesitation, she checked his heartbeat manually. A faint, irregular rhythm pulsed beneath her fingers, far more pronounced than yesterday. A potential arrhythmia. "Sir," she said firmly, "I need you to relax. Your heart rhythm is irregular. I'm calling the attending physician immediately." He yanked his hand back. "Don't you dare! Don't go running off like I'm some helpless child." Ayana took a breath, steady and controlled. "This isn't about pride. It's about your safety." The monitor beside him suddenly let out a sharp beep, a warning. His breathing hitched, his face paling slightly. For the first time since she met him, fear flickered in his eyes. He swallowed hard. What's happening?" "You're having an acute arrhythmia episode," she said, voice steady. "But don't worry, I've got you." Her movements became swift and precise.
She raised the bed angle, checked the IV, and pressed the emergency physician call button. Within seconds, the on-call doctor rushed in. Ayana explained the situation clearly, every detail delivered with expert precision. The doctor nodded, relying on her assessment without hesitation. "Good catch, Nurse Langston. This could have turned serious fast." A few minutes later, with the medication administered and the rhythm stabilizing, the danger passed. But the atmosphere in the room had changed entirely. The arrogance on Mr. Wellesley's face had melted away, replaced with something more vulnerable, a mixture of shock, fear, and reluctant gratitude. He stared at her silently as the doctor left. You noticed it before anyone else." Ayana wiped down her tools calmly. "It's my job to keep you safe, sir." He swallowed again, this time not from fear, but from recognition. "And you saved my life." She didn't boast, she didn't smile triumphantly. She simply nodded. "I did what any competent nurse would do." But he shook his head slowly. "No, not just any nurse. You're different." And then as she turned to update his chart, his eyes drifted to her name badge again. Ayana Langston. This time, he stared at it longer. Something about the name tugged at his memory. A business meeting years ago, a newspaper headline, a family of influence, wealth, and prestige. Langston. His jaw tightened, his breathing hitched again, but not from the arrhythmia. Could it be? His heart thudded painfully, not from illness, but from recognition. And for the first time, he truly looked at her. Not as a nurse, not as someone he thought was beneath him, but as someone whose last name carried power he suddenly, desperately remembered. The shift had begun, and he knew nothing about this woman was ordinary.
For the rest of the afternoon, the atmosphere inside room 512 felt charged, quiet but tense. Mr. Harrison Wellesley stared at Ayana every time she entered, not with malice anymore, but with a strange, unsettled curiosity. His arrogance had cracked, and through that crack, fear and confusion seeped in. He couldn't get her last name out of his mind. Langston. The name echoed like a half-forgotten memory, one he didn't want to remember, but couldn't escape. When Ayana returned in the evening to check his vitals, he finally gathered the courage to speak. "Nurse, Langston," he said slowly, watching her reaction. Ayana didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That name, Langston, is it connected to the Langston Foundation?" Ayana paused, her hand resting lightly on the blood pressure cuff. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look nervous. She simply looked tired, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Yes," she said calmly, "it is." Her voice held no pride, no anger, just truth. Mr. Wellesley's throat tightened. "Then your father must be—" Dr. Elias Langston, founder of the Langston Medical Foundation, former chairman of the National Healthcare Board. The air left his lungs in a sharp breath. The Langston name wasn't just wealthy, it was powerful. It was philanthropic. It funded hospitals, clinics, charities. It changed laws. It shaped medical standards across the country. It was a name that even billionaires approached carefully. And he had belittled her, mocked her, treated her as if she were a servant. He swallowed hard, panic settling into his chest. Why
Why would someone like you be here, working as a nurse? Ayana met his eyes, and in them, he saw something he hadn't expected. Strength, blended with sadness. Because I chose to be. My father raised me to believe that real impact comes from being present, from touching lives directly, not just writing policies or signing checks. She adjusted his IV, her movements steady. Becoming a nurse wasn't my way of stepping down. It was my way of stepping in. He stared at her, completely speechless. Ayana continued softly, "My family believes in service. My father did too. He died last year, and I promised myself I would continue his mission. From the ground level, where real people live, breathe, heal, and struggle." Her words felt too heavy, too honest for the small hospital room. Mr. Wellesley lowered his eyes. Shame washed over him, not the shallow embarrassment of being caught, but a deep, uncomfortable realization. He had tried to belittle the very daughter of the very man whose foundation funded his previous cancer treatments, whose grants supported his own private clinic, whose generosity he had benefited from without ever appreciating. And he had insulted her, the person dedicated to carrying that legacy forward. I didn't know," he whispered. Ayana responded gently, "You weren't supposed to. I don't wear my father's reputation as armor. I wear my own." Her professionalism remained intact, but there was a quiet fire in her voice that made him look away. In that moment, the power dynamic between them shifted completely. The patient who once commanded the room now sat small, humbled, and painfully aware of the gravity of his actions. And for the first time in days, silence filled room 512, not with tension, but with truth. The next morning brought soft sunlight into room 512, but the man lying in the hospital bed looked very different from the one who had arrived days ago. His arrogance had faded, replaced by a quiet, heavy humility. Harrison Wellesley couldn't sleep the entire night. Every time he closed his eyes, Ayana's calm face and her last name flashed in his mind. How many times had he barked at her? How many times had he treated her like she was beneath him? And all this time, she wasn't just any nurse. She was the daughter of a man whose generosity shaped an entire medical generation, including his own life. When Ayana stepped into the room for her morning rounds, he immediately struggled to sit up straighter. "Nurse Langston," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "I owe you an apology, a very deep one." Ayana gave a small smile, not prideful, not dismissive, just warm. "You don't owe me anything, sir. You owe yourself a new perspective." He lowered his head. "I was cruel, arrogant, and blind. You didn't deserve a single word I said." Ayana placed the stethoscope gently on his chest. "Maybe not, but sometimes people hurt others because they're hurting themselves." His eyes trembled. She had seen right through him. He sighed. "Losing my company, my friends, my wife leaving, I guess I started believing I needed to step on people to feel tall again." "And did it work?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, it only made me smaller." Ayana finished her checks and stepped back. "You don't have to stay that version of yourself. Every day you wake up is a chance to rewrite who you are." Her words carried the kind of sincerity that came not from wealth, but from experience, struggle, and compassion. Moments later, the hospital director entered the room carrying a folder. When he saw Ayanna, he straightened immediately. "Ah, Nurse Langston," he greeted with respect. "I reviewed the report on Mr. Wellesley's arrhythmia episode yesterday. Your intervention prevented a serious emergency." Harrison swallowed hard, another reminder of what he owed her. When the director left, Harrison turned to Ayanna again. "I'd like to make things right, truly, not because of who your father was, but because of who you are." Ayanna nodded gently. "Then start by being kinder to people you think have nothing, to people who serve you, to people you overlook." His eyes glistened. "I will, I promise." And for the first time in days, Ayanna believed him. When his discharge papers were finalized, Harrison stood at the doorway of his room, pausing before he left. He turned back to her. "Thank you for saving my life twice, once medically and once morally." Ayanna smiled softly. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Wellesley, and take care of the person you're becoming." He nodded, the weight of her words settling deep within him. As he walked out of the hospital, he felt lighter, not because his body was healed, but because his heart had finally learned a lesson that money, pride, and status could never teach. Respect everyone. You never know who they truly are, or the battles they're quietly fighting.
If this story touched your heart, don't leave without telling us. What did you learn from it? And before you scroll, let me know in the comments, which country are you watching from? Your support means the world. Hit subscribe so you don't miss our next powerful story.